All right. So my name is Katie Auney. I'm the Assistant Dean for External Relations at Philip Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland. I'd just like to welcome everybody to our program this evening, talking about how nonprofit organizations are shaping investigative journalism. And this is sponsored by our Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at Philip Merrill College of Journalism. Just a couple quick housekeeping notes. We are recording this and we will have the full program recording up on our YouTube channel tomorrow. We also encourage you to ask questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You'll see right in the middle at the bottom there, it says Q&A, and you can use that to submit questions for any of our panelists throughout the presentation, and Dean Dalglish will try to get to them as she's able to. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dean of Philip Merrill College, Dean Lucy Dalglish, and she will take it away with introducing the panel. Welcome, Dean Dalglish.
Thank you, Katie, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight in Washington, at least in the Washington area. It's a spectacular evening, so thank you for taking the time to join us this evening. We have an exciting, I hope it's an exciting discussion on nonprofit journalism and a little bit about collaborations between nonprofit journalism organizations. And I'd like to get started by introducing you to our panelists. First, we have Fergus Shiel, who is the managing editor of the International Consortium for Investigative Journalism, based here in Washington, D.C. Fergus has overseen many ICIJ projects, including among them the FinCEN files, which was the biggest global investigative journalism project of its kind ever, the implant files, China cables, Mauritius leaks, solitary voices, and bribery division. They have resoundingly drawn acclaim for ICIJ with many national and international awards. And before joining ICIJ, Fergus was editor of the Age's newspaper's internationally acclaimed tablet edition in Melbourne, Australia. Welcome, Fergus.
Thanks very much, Dean Dalglish. It's very nice to be here.
Vernon Loeb is familiar to Vernon Loeb is familiar to many of us. He is the senior editor of Investigations, Enterprise, and Innovations for Inside Climate News. Vernon brings years of experience leading teams of reporters. He comes to ICN from The Atlantic, where he served as politics editor. Before joining The Atlantic, he was managing editor of the Houston Chronicle, where he helped lead a rebuild of the newsroom. And in that role, he edited an investigative series that disclosed how Texas placed a secret cap on special education and dramatically cut services for handicapped children. The project was a Pulitzer Prize finalist for public service. He directed the paper's coverage of the devastation from Hurricane Harvey, which was also a Pulitzer Prize finalist for breaking news. He was previously, I think the first time we met, he was the assistant managing editor of the Washington Post. And he's also been a deputy managing editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer and California investigations editor for the Los Angeles Times. Kate Howard joins us from Kentucky, where she is a reporter, and is a managing editor of the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting. She joined the organization in 2016 as a reporter and became the managing editor in July of 2018. Her work has been the recipient of a National Investigative Reporters and Editors Award and numerous state and regional awards. She worked as a news reporter for nearly 5 years at the Tennessean, covering crime, courts, and transportation. She also spent more than 3 years at the Florida Times-Union, covering higher education, health, and crime issues, and more than 2 years writing about higher ed at the Omaha World Herald. Topher Sanders, in addition to being a valued member of the Howard Center Board of Advisors, covers race inequality in the Justice Center for ProPublica. In 2019, he was part of a team that was a Pulitzer Prize for public service and won the Peabody and George Polk Awards for their coverage of President Trump's family separation policy. In 2018, he and reporter Ben Conark received the Paul Tobenkin Award for race coverage and the Al Nakula Award for police reporting for their multi-part investigation, Walking While Black, which explored how jaywalking citations are disproportionately given to Black pedestrians. His reporting has won a number of other national awards, including an NABJ award, an Online Journalism Award, and the John Jay College Harry Frank Guggenheim Award for Excellence in Criminal Justice Reporting. In 2016, Topher co-founded the Ida B. Wells Society for Investigative Reporting. It's a nonprofit working to increase the number of investigative reporters and editors of color. And then Kathy Best, who for the last 2 years has been the editor and executive director of the Roy Howard Center for Investigative Journalism here at Philip Merrill College of Journalism. We hired her after she had been editor in Missoula, Montana. And many of you know her as the former editor of the Seattle Times. She's worked at the Baltimore Sun and several other daily newspapers. We were just overjoyed that she was able to join us at the Howard Center, where she's been leading efforts by students to cover the news. So on to our discussion. You know, in my previous life, I ran an organization called the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And about 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, I started seeing a rise in the number of nonprofits that were created to do reporting. And they were calling the Reporters Committee because many of them wanted to know, where do we find lawyers, or can you help us, or can you point us to the law in our state? And since that time, the number of nonprofits doing investigative journalism or even local community journalism has risen astronomically. You have the huge ones like ProPublica and ICIJ. Then you have the smaller ones like the New England Center for Investigative Journalism, the similar organization in Kentucky where Kate works, and in Denver was also an early adopter of the nonprofit model. And of course, at Merrill College, our own Capital News Service has been effectively a nonprofit news organization for more than 30 years. So nonprofit news organizations are increasing. And one other thing that we have noticed is that collaborations between nonprofit and for-profit news organizations are increasing. And sometimes student journalists are working and collaborating with the nonprofits and vice versa. So we're going to talk about nonprofit news as well as collaborations this evening. So I'd like to start out by asking each one of you to tell us a little bit about the niche or the role that you see for your particular organization. And I'm going to start with Fergus. Fergus, can you tell us a little bit about ICIJ and what it's producing that really no one else is doing?
Sure. So ICIJ is a bit, a little bit like a donut. There's a center, which is the staff at ICIJ, which is tiny, really. It's only about 42 people. And then there's the external rings, which on any given project can go from 50 to up to 400 reporters, and from 10 to up to 80 or 90 media organizations around the world. And so essentially what we do are collaborations, and we do collaborations that are extraordinarily difficult, and we do joint data lifts. Some projects are 11 million documents, 8 million documents, 10 million documents, and we have the capacity both to ingest the documents, store them, share them, and to work in secret. And I think that's our unique niche. Yeah.
Kate, can you tell us what you're doing in Kentucky and what role you're filling there?
Sure. So the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting is actually part of the public radio station in Louisville. So we were one of the first, I don't know if we were actually the first, but one of the first public radio stations, local, smaller public radio stations in investigative reporting. And so we really view our mission as, at the time we were created, it was filling the gap. The newspaper and other commercial media in town had really cut back and staff and cut back in that mission. And it was something that people in Louisville really missed and wanted to support and were willing to put the money behind. to create the center. And so, that's still our goal is we try very hard to select the stories and spend the time on the kinds of stories that we think other media outlets are not going to cover and that require, the attention that we can give it. So we do a mix of, midterm and long-term investigative projects for audio and for web. And our web is a very print style, partly because that's just the style that we work in, but also because we offer our stories to any newspapers that want to run it. And so often our stories will run in smaller newspapers throughout the state of Kentucky that don't have the staff or the capacity to do investigative journalism on their own. So yeah, that's our deal.
And are most of the subjects you cover related to Kentucky or regional or national? What's your subject matter?
Right, we're located in Louisville, so a lot of it ends up sort of starting in Louisville. Obviously, this last year, we've spent a tremendous amount of time covering the Louisville Metro Police Department with the Breonna Taylor shooting and the protests. But our mission and our scope is statewide, occasionally regional, but for the most part, just Kentucky.
Thanks. Vernon, Inside Climate News, what niche are you fulfilling?
Well, we were started like 13 years ago to fill a niche at the time, which was climate coverage. Like the feeling of the publisher back then was that nobody was really sufficiently covering this giant story or this giant threat to the planet. And so he created Inside Climate News. 13 years later, climate coverage isn't a niche anymore. I mean, the New York Times has a robust climate team. ProPublica does a great job writing about environmental justice and climate, and on and on. The Post won a Pulitzer for covering climate. So now we're trying to fill voids as they emerge in climate coverage. So a couple of years ago, we started building regional networks to work with smaller regional papers that were losing staff, and many of which didn't have any environmental coverage or any climate coverage. And the events of last year really illustrated the need to cover environmental justice much more aggressively. So we've recently created an environmental justice team and a fellowship program. I should say, by the way, thank you to the Howard Center. We have 2 Howard Center fellows this year full-time. They're from the Arizona State wing of the Howard Center, but they're charter members of our environmental justice team, Katie Surma and Aja Aning, and they're did a great job. And so they're hard at work. We just had them down in Pensacola writing about a Superfund site in Pensacola that has been on the NPL for since 1983, since they started it, and still on there. We want to keep, and we're also now sort of a new need we're trying to fill is we're working in Hampton to help the Howard Center start up there in its 3rd location. So we, with thankfully lots of coverage on the climate beat, we try to provide sort of full service coverage. We've sort of made our name doing investigative stuff, but we're also always trying to find niches that will sort of enable us to be a sort of force multiplier for climate coverage nationally. Thanks.
Topher, ProPublica was sort of the grandbaby of them all. How did ProPublica change, and how is it, what do you think the audience is now and the role it plays?
How it has a lot more name recognition than it did when it started in 2007 and 8, right? It's earned that name recognition, and I think what that means is that inside our shop, we always the name of the game. I think maybe there's a less of a absolute need that every piece be a collaborative piece. And that's maybe even a change from when I started there 5-6 years ago. And so we still, for our really, the pieces that we're really proud of and that we want lots of people to see, we understand that the legacy publications still have a wider audience than ProPublica does. We want to collaborate because we want those stories to land in as many hands as possible. But for some of the more routine, enterprisey project type stories, we have shown more of a willingness to go those along. We've built up over time. And so I think that that's a major change. Also, ProPublica's got in the last 4 or 5 years, and I think that that is also a change. It's allowed us to tackle a lot more subject matter, and that's also something that you know, the staff is really and hopefully benefits readers.
Kathy, 3 years ago, the Scripps Howard Foundation helped start the Howard Centers at Arizona State. And since then, we've been collaborating with a variety of people. The Howard Centers also get support from folks like the Park Foundation and Annie B. Casey Foundation. What niche we're trying to fill?
Yeah, so mission of the Howard Centers and universities, but I'm more familiar with Merrill College, of course, is to of investigative reporters by having them do national investigations. And so we have done that by stories just within Maryland, but also by collaborating with NPR on a climate story, Vernon, looking at urban heat islands and how that would affect people living in inner cities, problems that were only going to grow as the climate warmed. We've also done city collaborations where we team up with investigative editors at other universities and pool our students and have them work on projects. The biggest one was a 7-university collaboration, which almost made my head explode. But it's been fun because each university brings its own talents, and our students get to learn not only from their professors or from me, but also from the students and the people teaching investigative reporting at the other universities. This summer, we'll do our first collaboration with historically Black colleges and universities, and that's new territory for us, and we're really excited about it.
Thanks. So let's talk for a moment about the vacuums that you think that you are filling. Does anyone want to share what they feel would not be covered if it weren't for your organization? What would be lost without you? Fergus?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I should say investigation was great. It was really good. It was really good. I loved it. Well done. What we tried to do is we overcome several tyrannies. The famous Australian history book called The Tyranny of Distance from everywhere else. And in our case at RCIJ, we overcome the tyranny of distance. So we bring reporters in. And then we overcome the tyranny of language because they're reporters that speak different languages. And so we overcome the tyranny of tyranny, which sounds like an odd sort of thing to say, but it's actually true. So we work with reporters in countries that are extremely dangerous, and we embolden them to do so. And we work with reporters, say, in Liberia, where there's no publication. They text their stories to Ghana, and it appears there. We work with reporters in Russia and in Ukraine who face threats daily all across Latin America. And so, monthly I hear of problems in Paraguay, Ecuador. Last the secret police raided a reporter in Russia. And so this is what ICIJ can do. It can bring people together, embolden them to report. The report comes out, they're going to have safety in numbers. And we can also do things together that we couldn't possibly do, such as plow through 10 million documents, because you simply can't do it because organizations don't have the time to do it. But if you've got 80 over hundreds and hundreds of documents, it makes do it in a timely fashion, and then you can get an investigation out that's in depth, that's meaningful. Broken systems, again, that's what we do. If I was going to pick one niche that we have, it's broken systems. We can look at broken systems universally, whereas otherwise a country is just looking at it alone.
Yeah. Do you also find unevenness in the skills of the journalists? Are you doing a lot of training?
And that's one of the joys of it, actually. So we work with, say, Aloysius David in Liberia, who, as I said, doesn't have a publication, or we work with people in Benin or in, you know, I could pick numerous countries. Cambodia, we work with a reporter there at the minute, and the skill levels are varied. And then we work with the New York. We work with people that have exceptional skills, and then ones that are just starting out. And what the joy of it is that the ones with exceptional skills lift up the ones that have got rudimentary skills. And that's one of the great things about ICIJ, and one of the pleasures of working here.
You know, Vernon, I think you talked about this a little bit. The Inside Climate News was formed as a specialization because there was a need for climate news. Does your specialization allow you to do journalism that for-profit newsrooms no longer have the staff or the budget or the time to do? And I'd like to open that question to everybody. Let's start with Vernon.
Yeah. Well, you know, certainly at the top of the journalism pyramid, that is not the case. I mean, I think the New York Times and the Washington Post, ProPublica, the really well-funded, robust national organizations, you know, have, you know, absolutely, you know, spectacular climate coverage, infinite resources, or so it seems to us. So, you know, there's no dearth there. That we certainly can't do anything that they're not doing. But climate is such a big topic that, you know, my view is there's room for everybody. And then as you move down to the local level, there is a need. There are hundreds, as you know, of hundreds of newspapers in the country right now whose newsrooms are being hollowed out, who don't have any environmental reporters. I mean, it's not uncommon for a fairly substantial regional newspaper in a mid-sized city to have no environment reporter right now, and really no one covering climate on an ongoing basis. I mean, that's common. I mean, most of those papers at most have one climate reporter or one environment reporter. When I was managing editor of the Houston Chronicle, we had kind of one environment reporter most of the time. And I think that person, after they left, might not have been replaced after I left. So there's a huge need, you know, at the regional level and the small town level to cover climate and the environment. And I think nonprofits play an important niche and play an important role in providing that coverage. But, you know, I mourn for the loss of the well-funded, robust legacy newsrooms. They are never going to be replaced in this country, or they're not being replaced right now. And I think we're playing an important role in, you know, as I said, trying to be a force multiplier. But I think those newspapers are sorely missed all over the country. So again, there's a huge crying need for nonprofits like us to help fill the void, you know, out in the hinterlands, at the regional, mid-sized city level and below.
Yeah. Kate, you mentioned the need to replace the local news organizations. What subject areas, from your experience, are those local newsrooms really crying out for? What do they really need?
Everything.
Well, first, I do want to say that there are many very good media outlets here in Louisville, and I wouldn't describe it as filling a vacuum, because there are quite a few newsrooms doing really good here. But there are some things that they do really well that we do not waste our time trying to touch, right? There are numerous reporters in the state of Kentucky that cover state politics very well. We do not have a reporter covering state politics right now, because at this point that hasn't been identified as something that we're super lacking, that the state is lacking, right? And so we added a reporter recently to cover child and family services and youth issues, because that's something that's far less covered. We did a collaboration recently with the imprint about that. And so we try to see what are other media outlets doing really well and figure out where the gaps are that we can come in. And so there are a lot of great criminal justice reporters, police reporters, but nobody was really covering issues of domestic violence, sexual assault, and how the criminal justice system interact with those issues. And so we had a reporter spend a year or so on investigations related to those topics. And so we more come at it from the perspective of what's not already being done really well that fits with our mission.
You know, Topher, you know, I'm privileged in my role to be able to judge a lot of national journalism contests. It's a privilege and it's kind of a time suck, but it's wonderful to read things. And one thing about ProPublica that I'm always astonished by is, like, in any given year, the organization has collaborations and subject matter stories going on. I mean, I can't even I've lost count of, in any given year, how many you've done. There was an amazing one a year or so ago up in Alaska. How do you pick what you're going to work on? What is the process, and how do you decide who to partner with? Or do they come to you?
Yeah, it happens a number of ways. So so let's talk about the Alaska project you mentioned. That happened through ProPublica's local reporting network, which is a program that's now maybe 3 or 4 years old, where, you know, ProPublica basically grant funds. You know, a local outfit has a strong, compelling idea for an investigation in a project, and it's a competitive grant process where they submit those proposals. And, you know, ProPublica, I participate in that. They use staff to kind of vet them as they come through, and put the really good ones in a bunch for the leadership to evaluate and figure out where they want to, you know, put their resources. And we basically fund ProPublica through the grants it's received. We'll fund that reporting for a year. And what it does for a local organization is allows that reporter to spend the time working on that project. And if the organization, so there's a reporter's position, so they're not losing that day-to-day coverage. And that's so often the struggle with local organization is, how can they let one staffer take 8 months, 9 months, 10 months to work on some project? We got to feed the beast. We got to keep copy coming in. And that was the world that me and Kate both came up in. We crossed paths at the Florida Times Union. And so that's where the Alaska project came from. So that's how we pick those projects. Internally, reporters participate in a similar process where, what do I have this year? What projects are exciting me? And you put down your thoughts on paper. You put down as much pre-reporting as you can on paper, and you and your editor spend several weeks kind of kicking the tires on some of your ideas, and the good ones float to the top, and that's what they unleash you on to do that year.
Kathy, working at a university and working with student journalists, the process is really quite different. Can you kind of talk through how our faculty come up with story ideas and how they assemble a project?
Sure. So I am fortunate because Merrill College is filled with really, really talented journalists. And one of the people that I get to work with on a pretty regular basis is Deborah Nelson, who won one Pulitzer for her own reporting and edited 2 other Pulitzer projects. So just using Deb as an example, the project that we did this spring came from Deb and I batting ideas around. But when you're working with student journalists, you need to look at first we need to do a project that can be done in a semester, or if it's going to take more than that, in 2 semesters. And then also when in planning for it, we need to keep in mind that this is a learning process for the students. So they need make and Lucy insists that they take other classes. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so they have to juggle their other classes with the work that we're doing. So in selecting figuring out something that fits within the longer time horizon when you're working on a student project. 2, that isn't competitive because, on it, chances are we're going to get beat. And 3, that can bring together the specialties within the universities. So all of our projects rest on a really strong data foundation. So we need to make sure that the data editor, Sean Mussenden, and his students have time to do the analysis. And then we need to make sure that the digital folks have time to build a website or build graphics. So it's similar to a newsroom in that it's the same disciplines, but bringing them together is a much more time-consuming process. But the other thing is, we need to find an audience too, like everybody else. And the stories that we do often move on the Associated Press wire, or we've had a distribution collaboration with USA Today. The idea behind that is we're meeting a need that you guys identified, which is newsrooms don't have the resources to do their own work anymore. So we're trying to do stories that are relevant to readers and can fill holes that newspapers can't do on their own anymore.
Thanks. I'm going to go to a question from Merrill student Brenda Wintrode, who asks, it's my perception that nonprofit outlets have a little more latitude or time to dig deeper and do the kind of journalism that honestly just takes more work. And is this statement true or not true for your organizations? And does anyone want to address that question? Yeah, just jump in. Is it?
Well, I mean, I think it's true and it's not true. I mean, sure, we have more latitude than, a newspaper with a shrinking newsroom and lots of commercial demands on it and an obsession with web traffic and so forth. On the other hand, Fergus's group and the New York Times have, incredible resources and ProPublica and spend massive amounts of time on projects. So, I think it depends who you're talking about. I think one of the things we're able to do, is we have a little bit more latitude. And so we were able, for example, to take 2 students coming out of Arizona State and put them on a investigative team and, sort of throw them into the deep end of the pool a little more readily maybe than the Post or the Times would have been able to do. We were able to take that risk and gamble a little bit and work a little bit more creatively with them. I think, nonprofits that are sort of inventing their own missions as they go are a little bit more able to do that than a big, mainstream media organization would be. So I think we have that flexibility. So it's not nearly time, being able to spend on a project, but it's also sort of a flexibility to innovate and move your mission a little bit as you want to.
With if you're working at the Times or the Post, or you're at a broadcast station, you have a delivery system. But when you're dealing with a funder and you're asking for money to do this great journalism, one of the really important questions they're going to say is, how are you going to get this to the public? What delivery system are you going to use? And most nonprofits really have websites and social media. How do you go about maximizing your audience? Partnerships or incredible audience analytic teams, or does anyone want to take that one?
We do it in a really clever way. We're like the little bird that's on the back of the antelope going through the savannah. We're not the large animal, we're the bird. And so what we do is we give our stories away for free to people that will publish them. And it works a treat, absolute treat.
So do we.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah, a partnership is baked into everything we do. We're always looking for partnerships. We're always looking for, what the Pulitzer Center calls distribution networks, people with much bigger audiences that we do. So for example, right now we're doing a project, we're collaborating on a global project with Undark magazine, which is connected with MIT, and NBC News, which is, got the big audiences, the distribution partner. So yeah, we're always looking for that big amplifier to, expand our audience, and also to, expand our resources.
This is a little bit of a luxury to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. For us, we want as much audience as possible. We're looking for partnerships. We're looking to boost our social media, newsletters, and all of that. But for us, because like Vernon said, you're kind of making your mission up as you go, and you're kind of setting your own rule book. At the end of the year, when we're evaluating, we're thinking about how many stories did we do that had impact? What kind of impact can we demonstrate? And that really leads our decision making more so than whether or not the audience grew or shrunk. Like last year, KYCIR's web audience actually shrunk because our reporters were spending so much time working for the daily radio station because of all the breaking news that happened. That is not a failure to me because we did a ton of really important work, and the work that our community needed from us at that time. It does not show in the analytics.
And that's a great example of the kind of flexibility nonprofits have to, view their impact in a different way. There's not this obsession necessarily on web traffic.
Yeah. Here's an interesting question, sort of like the type of question I used to get at the Reporters Committee. An anonymous participant here says, I work for a nonprofit news outlet now, and we've had some issues getting full access as press. Chiefly, the Senate Periodical Press Gallery, plainly in its rules, does not give credentials to nonprofit outlets. So we've been unable to get congressional press passes so far. I wonder if any of you are having similar access issues, and if you have any thoughts on how to get nonprofit newsrooms to be considered as quote unquote real newsrooms. Topher? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't had to deal with this at all with the type of work I do. I find it really obtuse that the Senate Periodical Press doesn't consider nonprofit news to be real news, and I guess it just has room for all the private big dollar news people. So I don't have an answer for that, but I would imagine that it's something that nonprofit organizations could get together and press on, because that's something that should get fixed.
The Senate is particularly tough because and that's actually, as I recall, kind of run by journalists, and it's kind of a little closed system. But Fergus, have you had any trouble at ICIJ getting press credentials for nonprofit journalists?
No, we haven't. Our biggest problem is a very different problem, is that the mere mention of ICIJ sends people scattering to the winds. So this is our difficulty. But, I'm sympathetic to that. That sounds really, really challenging. So I would simply suggest, this sounds like a crazy idea, but I would ring political correspondents and ask them to lobby on your behalf, because they're really persuasive. And so if you know somebody at CNN, or you know somebody at the NBC, or you have a friend of a friend, give them a call and ask them to put in a word for you.
I have a question about something that I know you all have to worry about. How much time do you have to spend raising money? Is it getting easier? And Julie Klingenstein, who is one of our big supporters from Maryland, also asks, if we're in a triaging situation as a donor and we have limited resources, where is the greatest need for our philanthropy? Let's talk for a minute about money. Is anyone directly involved in raising money? I know, Kathy, you are. How many grant proposals you've written in the last year.
It's a skill that I never anticipated needing to have, and it's an art form that I would love to learn more from my colleagues about. But you know, fortunately, in the nonprofit world, philanthropies have understood, are beginning to understand that. Well, let me stop for a second. When I was at the Seattle Times, we got a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to fund education coverage. And one of the things that the foundation asked is that, you know, we show after a year or two that this was sustainable, so that they could stop giving us money. And yeah, which was a model for many, many philanthropies. But I think that they're finally coming to understand that with what's going on in the industry, being sustainable is getting harder and harder and harder. And so, you know, now I find that the philanthropies that we're dealing with, you know, want an understanding of the metrics. They want an understanding of the audience. They want to see what they're getting for the money. And I think as long as we can show them that, and we can show them that we're producing really good journalism that people would not get anywhere else, that you know, you have to make it sustainable argument is going away, and we can breathe a little easier. But you know, is anybody else having that experience?
And
Yeah, I mean, I find fundraising both exhilarating and terrifying. It's exhilarating to the extent that you don't have some suit from the business side telling you can't do anything you want to do in the newsroom. If you want to do something and you're really committed to it, you go out and try to find the money to do it. And usually that sort of passion or commitment will help you find the money. And it's terrifying because, you know, the money runs out, or, you know, it's a very competitive fundraising scene right now, even for climate. We find that a lot of the philanthropic dollars want to go to fund activism, and we're not activists, we're journalists. And in fact, a lot of people think we are activists, and we constantly remind them we're nonpartisan, you know, we're a nonpartisan climate newsroom. But we find, like Kathy said, we don't find so much that people are saying, we'll give you 2 years and expect you to go on your own, because we give our content away. That's not our model. We're not, you know, we're not trying to make money, or although we are doing a much better job of online fundraising now, and that's becoming a substantial funding stream for us now. It is very competitive. And even when funders stick with you, as many of ours have for many, many years, it's still very competitive. And again, as your ambitions grow, you look for more, you look to increase your fundraising, and it's slow. Foundations work at a glacial pace, and you want to do a project right away, and they'll give you money. They'll take your grant application in 6 months and get back to you in a year, and it's just very frustrating. But you know, it's also very exhilarating, because, you know, if you can dream it up, you can conceivably fund it and do it.
you know, when nonprofit grants were starting to come in for coverage, like Kathy said, at first they were very topic related. We will give you X amount of money if you cover this topic. Kind of, you know, saying, you know, kind of in sort of the activism role. It's my perception that there is more support out there now for people saying, we think you're a valuable organization, we'll give you the money, you decide where to spend it. Am I completely off base with that? Topher, you've been working with the Ida B. Wells group. What's your experience been?
Yeah, and that's the context in which I know anything about fundraising to the degree that I do. It's been, you know, I think there's been a lot of excitement about the mission of the Ida B. Wells Society, particularly in the last 2 or so years. And there has been a willingness from funders to say, we value your mission, we value what you're doing. here's some money, and we're confident that you'll spend it in an appropriate way in this time period or whatever. We've gotten more of that type of assistance in the last 2 years than we could have imagined. And so I don't know that that speaks more broadly, but it definitely has been an experience at IWL Society that we've seen more people willing to not, dictate or not say, hey, the money needs to be used in this way specifically. Use it to the furtherance of your mission, and that'll satisfy us.
Kate, we have a question for Marianelli De Leon asking, I wanted to ask what limitations would nonprofit organizations face other than money when it comes to bringing out stories to the public? Can you think of any specific limitations other than money?
Well, when you're new, depending on your staff makeup, sometimes you have the challenge of not having the name recognition. And so that can be a limitation with sourcing. When we very first were created and nobody knew what the Kentucky Center for Investigative Reporting was, I think it was sometimes difficult to generate story leads. That's not an issue anymore. A local nonprofit investigative shop, although it can set its own mission, is going to be smaller than your TV stations and your newspapers. And so, in many ways, it's all of the same challenges of anybody in any other sort of media outlet, just in my opinion, with more freedom and more flexibility to pursue the news as you see it.
Fergus, I imagine that ICIJ is also in some countries one step ahead of the police or political persecution. That strikes me as something you probably have to deal with.
We do, yeah. So that's a constant challenge. I just think about the last year or so. COVID was it was immeasurably challenging across the world. So we had, colleagues who had family members dying across the world as it rolled, and as I speak in India, it's just an absolute horror show. And then on top of that, you've got political oppression. And so at any given time, ICIJ partners and members are facing significant challenges. And I know the way that the debate was organized, and it makes sense that you talk about the hollowing out of the legacy media, but there was a hollowing out of not-for-profits too. COVID has been a financial disaster for not-for-profits across the world. And you've seen, we saw entire operations shut up shop because people couldn't travel, and because they couldn't travel, they couldn't go and ask for money. And so the last year has been immeasurably challenging for all not-for-profits, including ICIJ. And one of the challenges of working for a not-for-profit, as Kate mentioned, is hiring people. And you're hiring people and saying to them, we really want to hire you. We want to hire the best. But equally, we can't guarantee we're going to be here in 5 years because our funding runs out in 18 months. And so these are the challenges that not-for-profits face. So it's not for the faint-hearted, the world of the not-for-profits.
Well, let's talk. I said at the top we would talk a little bit about collaborations. Who do you typically collaborate with, and how do you go about doing it? And how important is the collaboration to your operation? We talked about it a little bit. Kathy, do you want to start?
Sure. So when we, in our proposal to create the Howard Center at Merrill College, we said that collaboration was going to be part of our mission, collaborating with other universities. And so, we've done that for 3 of the projects that we've done. All of them involve collaborating with another university or with NPR or another news outlet. So it's important. It's important for us, but it was something that, and I'm really eager to hear the other folks on this panel talk about this. I'd never done a collaboration, a real collaboration, until I walked into this job. So I had to give myself a crash course in what it took to manage one, and learn about MOUs and all of the other things that have to be in place to make a collaboration successful. Listening to Fergus talk about the collaborations he does, I will never complain again about any of that, because it's way easier than what you guys go through. But there's a real art to figuring out how to work with other news organizations, other universities, so that everybody feels heard, so that you have a great communication system, so you can share information back and forth and end up. And the other thing I'd say is, for a university, it's absolutely imperative that the work that we do is bulletproof. So we have a fact-checking protocol that we developed, and we make everyone that we work with at other universities use it, because one mistake and nobody will ever want to use our stuff again. So that is like a fundamental part of any collaboration that we go into.
Sort of the Deb Nelson checklist. That's what started.
Yeah,
It's tough.
Well, the other thing, I mean, the first time that I went through this, we had one story that had 300 fact checks in one story. And I thought, oh my God, where have I gone? These people are crazy. But we have not had a single error. And that's what keeps us going.
Kate, I saw you nodding your head when you were talking about some of these practices. Do you have thoughts on what makes for a good collaboration?
Yeah, I'm sort of laughing because I feel like every time we do a new collaboration, even though I take all these best practices, just like Kathy said, I feel like I'm starting from scratch all over again. Every time you work with a new partner, there are inherent risks, like reputational risks. If you work with a media outlet that doesn't have the same standards as you, different expectations about the time and investment. But overall, our partnerships have been a really positive experience. And one of the things that I think has been really nice about kind of the resurgence of acknowledgement of the importance of local journalism is we have a lot of national partners now, sometimes that we bring stories to, and sometimes who bring stories to us because they say, we want to do this story in Kentucky and we want to do it right. And we do not want to kind of parachute in and tell a story that doesn't ring true, which we really respect and appreciate the opportunity to be parts of stories like that. And I think it also indicates a recognition from national outlets that there are local news outlets doing work of the same caliber and quality as their outlets and make for good partners. And so we really enjoyed that, for being able to tell more national stories than we normally would, kind of expand our audience, but still be serving our local people that we work for.
Here's a very interesting question from someone in our audience. Were there any funders that wanted an impact on the kind of reporting that was done and maybe how it's done? And if so, have you ever had to turn down money for the sake of objectivity? Anyone have any war stories about that topic? No?
I've never had anybody ask for impact like as a condition of the grant, if that's what they mean.
We have funders who give us money to cover particular things, and they want to see us cover the things that we said we were going to cover as terms of the grant. We don't let them tell us what to cover, and at all. No, they have no say in that at all. And but I don't think it's unreasonable for them. For example, we have a funder who funds reporting in California on climate and agriculture on our part. And so they want to see that we're doing that, and we're happy to show them that we're doing that. And that's where it stops. And we have turned down a lot of potential funding from people who want us to be activists, or want us to go after somebody, or want us to come up with this result or that result. And we say to them, that's not what we do. Sorry, we don't want your money.
Topher, I see you nodding your head. Do you have an example to share?
Not particularly. I just know that there are scenarios where it would make a lot of sense. Like if a bank wanted to give you your organization money, and you'd have to think long and hard about whether or not that would be appropriate for your organization to take money from a bank that could be in your coverage. It could ultimately end up in your coverage, but none. I'm often in the trenches, and the development at ProPublica as it stands is not something that I have to deal with. But at the IDB Well Society, we've not encountered yet someone who wanted to give us money that would become a problem for our mission, and we would want to put some of those journalistic kind of standards forefront for us, because we ultimately could be a place that journalism is going to be produced by any young people we work with, et cetera. So we would want to hold on to those similar standards and not create any points of conflict for us.
Well, in our last few minutes, Kathy, I'm going to ask a question on your behalf. What are the rest of you looking for in the reporters that you hire? What skills, what experiences, what personal characteristics? And in particular, I've got a couple of people here who say they want to go work internationally for ICIJ. How do you get connected to that? So, Kate, how about if we start with you? If someone comes to you and wants a job, what are you looking for?
Yeah, sure. I think always the first thing I'm looking for is evidence of curiosity and passion. That's like always number one. For investigative specific job, I don't care whether or not you've had investigative in your title. That took a long time for me. It took a long time for Topher. It takes a while to get there for that to be your gig, right? But I want to see evidence that somebody has been looking for those types of stories on their beat, and has been tenacious in that type of coverage, even if the scope is not the same as what they would do when they came to work for us. I would say that's the number one thing.
Vernon, how about you? I remember dealing with you. You used to hire a lot of interns.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always, want to see good basic skills. It's the foundations of the business are writing and reporting. They were when I graduated from journalism school, and they still are, and they probably always will be. There's lots of bells and whistles now, but I want to see somebody who can report deeply and accurately, and somebody who writes well. But I also want to see work ethic and attitude, and I'll take work ethic and attitude over great reporting and writing skills, because I can teach somebody reporting and writing skills, but sort of work ethic and attitude are sort of more innate. And I look for people who I just think are just totally committed to the story and will really, really pour themselves into it. So, it's a combination, but work ethic and attitude, are to me central in when I'm hiring somebody.
Topher, how about you?
Yeah, I haven't done any, raw hiring this way. We've done a lot of selection of interns and selection for fellows at the IDB Well Society, and I sit on a lot of ProPublica's hiring committees, so I give them input and thoughts on who they end up hiring. And I love all the words that have been used here: curiosity, being tenacious, and wanting to just nail the story. But I also think there's just this you know it when you see it kind of thing, element about someone who cares about digging deep, will go that third and fourth layer of question, will circle back on an answer that wasn't satisfying. Those type of skills are just sometimes in a person, and just like Vernon said, I think that you can teach some of the other elements, but the work ethic and the drive, some people just have it, and I'm looking for that. I'm looking for that curiosity that has that drive behind it.
Fergus, I think we'll wind up with you. What is ICIJ looking for? What do you?
Sure. So the archetypal picture of an investigative journalist is a lone wolf, usually a bloke in an overcoat who doesn't have any friends. That's not what we want. We absolutely do not want that. They come in, they're out the door. We do not want lone wolves. We want collaborators, and so we want people that are amiable, cooperative, will go out of their way to help others to get to the story as well as themselves. We demand an international focus. It's amazing how many people come to the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists and have no interest in the world. That really doesn't help, you know. So if you're coming for an interview, try and at least feign an interest in the world, because that will help. And then beyond that, it's what Vernon says, what Kate says, it's what Topher says, all of those things. Curiosity, stamina, you know, probably for what we do, mental resilience helps, because what we do is really, it knocks you about, because, you know, you could be on a project for 18 months and you don't know if it's going to succeed. And that's really hard yakka. So that's an Australian term for hard work. So if you have mental resilience, that helps too. But I echo everything that Kate, Vernon, Kathy and Topher have said about hiring people.
Well, thank you, Fergus, Shiel, Kate Howard, Vernon Loeb, Topher Sanders, and Kathy Best. We've come to the end of our hour. We're so grateful to all of you for joining in this conversation sponsored by the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at the University of Maryland's Philip Merrill College of Journalism. We look forward to collaborating with all of you, and you will be hearing from Kathy, I am sure. So thanks, and hopefully we'll all be together at an IRE convention or an ONA convention or something. We'll not have to look at each other on a screen anymore very, very soon. All right. Thank you, everyone, and good evening.